I don't know the exact statistics on this, but apparently, with some of the public opinion polling, when young people were asked, um, have you heard the slogan, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea? Have you heard that slogan? And many of them say yes. Um, do you agree with the slogan? Many of them say yes. Can you tell us which river and which sea? And that's where they don't have the answer. Now, I don't want to overstate that. It is often the case that people, whether they're young or not so young, sign on to certain kinds of rhetoric without necessarily knowing all of the underlying facts. But in this case, I think it's an important observation because it relates to the bigger question about whether anti-Israel and pro-Palestine, where do you draw the line, which was your question. And again, I'm always quite cautious about proposing that I know where to draw lines in these complex matters. But I would ask myself the following question: does pro-Palestine mean the elimination, the eradication, the revocation of the Jewish right to a sovereign state in Israel? If being pro-Palestine means the destruction of the Jewish state, then I think you have a fairly clear line, and that definition of pro-Palestine is at the very least unacceptable because it denotes the elimination of a sovereign state that has been recognized by the international community and the United Nations and all the rest. If by pro-Palestine one means an advocacy for policies, programs, practices that can promote and reinforce and protect Palestinian national rights, I think I would be part of that. As long as it is clear that that does not require or imply any kind of eradication of the Jewish state. So this is where it's a fairly devious maneuver on the part of people who don't want to be labeled as anti-Semitic to make a kind of blurring of the distinction between being opposed to certain policies or government initiatives undertaken by the State of Israel versus opposition to the fundamental proposition of Zionism as a secure and safe sovereign state for the Jewish people in its historic homeland. If one accepts the idea that there can be Palestinian sovereignty, by which I mean Palestinian Arab sovereignty, because after all, up until approximately 1948, most of the Jews living in that region called themselves Palestinians. This is another historical point that some people have not noticed. In any event, I think that if one can recognize Palestinian Arab sovereignty as a legitimate goal, side by side with the continuation of a full-throated, unequivocal defense of the idea of a Jewish state in its historic homeland, that's a very different definition of pro-Palestine than what you see in slogans that call for Palestine free from the river to the sea. And once again, many of the people who are using that slogan may not be aware of the way it is formulated, even in the Hamas charter, where it says, not Palestine shall be free, Palestine shall be Arab from the river to the sea. And this is why many, maybe even I would say most Jews, regardless of their knowledge of the history of the creation of the Jewish state, regardless of their friendship or hostility to the current government, regardless of how much they like or dislike, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu or those who disliked Yitzhak Rabin, regardless of all of that, when they see a slogan that essentially is interpretable as calling for the death of the Jewish state as an entity, as a reality, it falls right into the definition of not just anti-Semitism, but very hateful and I would say unacceptable rhetoric that is not applied in any other case that I know of, where people who are opposed to a particular government's policies or programs allow themselves to call for the eradication of the country. In 1968 and 69, I was a very active protester against the American war in Vietnam, and I never stood next to anyone who had a poster calling for the end of America. Very important distinction, which I think helps for people who are not so sure whether it's anti-Semitism, it's anti-Zionism. This would be part of a checklist of questions that I would recommend to people to ask themselves. Would you have the same kind of position if you are opposed to the French involvement in Algeria? Are you therefore opposed to the existence of France? If you are opposed to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, are you opposed to the existence of Russia as a state? And if the answer to that question is, well, as a matter of fact, the only country I can think of where my opposition to some of what they are doing allows me to call for or side with people who are calling for its complete elimination, that would be a flashing red light on the potential anti-Semitism meter that should be going off. If you see what I'm suggesting here,
it's very important what you say, the professor, because I also have to admit I have been discussing the contemporary anti-Semitism with many people, and we rarely get into such deep details. It's true. You have the right to call for the two-state solution where a Jewish state and a Palestinian state can coexist, whether they will have a relation or not. It doesn't matter. But when you are involved in a call for the elimination, eradication, and also genocide of the entire Jewish people, and not only that, you are labeling all Jews who are living not necessarily in Israel, across the world, as the agents of the state of Israel, it becomes very problematic. But the real question here, Professor, is that how can we integrate such narratives into the education system? Because we have heard a lot about education programs. The French commissioner told me about their education programs. The Germans told me about their education programs.